Thank you very much for coming to the second part of this day. That's the last panel of the day, so that's a nice way to finish this conference with a panel discussion on the AI's impact on society. I'm Albert Bifet, Director of the Institute University of Waikato. And I am Phil Mourot from University of Waikato as well. So we've got the privilege in this panel to have wonderful people here. Yeah, we have Daniel Wilson from the Center of Director of the Center of Machine Learning for Social Good here at University of Auckland. We have Paul Seiler from Panelists Cloud. We have Emma MacDonald for the Director of the Interim Center of Data Ethics and Innovation, Institute of Statistics. And finally, we have Jonathan Kim from Callaghan Innovation. So many, many thanks for accepting to be in this panel. So yeah, maybe we're thinking just to start, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe what's the most significant impact that you think that AI will have in society and especially in New Zealand.
Kia ora kōrua, thank you very much. Kia ora koutou. So, ko Daniel Wilson tōku ingoa, hiuri tēnei no Ngāpui, me Ngāti Pikiao. I'm Daniel. I whakapapa up north, mostly, to southern Hokianga. I'm also in the School of Computer Science. So I'm going to be talking mostly from a Māori data sovereignty perspective for some of these questions. And this question about the impact on society, it seems like I'm just sort of thinking of a couple of thrusts. So there's discussions about the transformative potential, which requires a bit of imagination. And then there's efficiencies from AI, which is doing the same things, but more efficiently, right? So I think it's already been mentioned before earlier in Emma's talk about the superpower of Māori data sovereignty. It's a real opportunity for rethinking how we do things in a distinctive way. And it's an opportunity for us to be, Māori are not the only Indigenous community in the world. It's the opportunity for us to be a leader in Indigenous data sovereignty and algorithmic sovereignty. Globally, there is a lot of stuff already going on overseas, but also locally, there are, the Māori economy is quite large, so there are Māori land trusts that need things like pest control, predator control. There are products that are being grown, whānau and hapu products that need to be managed. We've already talked yesterday about Māori revitalisation, Indigenous languages. So there's lots of things that we can do differently through Māori data sovereignty. Kia ora.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Paul. I'm from Wellington and I'm the General Manager of Panelists Cloud. I'm sort of here as maybe a citizen and an industry rep. I do need a commercial focus. I have to pay wages, right? I've got to pay bills and I've got to look after customers and service levels. But in that space, I have around me talented computer scientists. I have customers who are doing exciting things in the space that you are. Some of the people speaking at the conference here are also our customers. So I listen and learn from them. I don't know where in society this movement, this change will have the biggest effect, but my money's on the people. I say it as a pun both ways. That's where impact will be, is already, and will grow, but it's also where the investment needs to go. If we support, as parents, as educators, as employers, as directors, people to work through this better, then we'll gain more from what the technology allows and we'll have less harm. Last year, my son was NCA Level 1. AI tools initially were a quick way to get around some homework obligations and hopefully escape plagiarism barriers, right? This year he's decided he wants excellence, and so what he's learnt is he can put the marking schedules as well as his draft assignments in and get feedback around how to improve. That is a stepwise change for the use of the technology in a better way for him. Some of his teachers will offer that service anyway, but teachers are busy. And so he is on this journey to get excellence in the year and figuring out, in conversation with his mother and father, how the technology can help him. I hope that we do that in our workplace, in our families, in our communities and circles. My money's on the people.
Kia ora, I'm Emma. If you're at my session before, I'm sorry, you're going to have to listen to me yet again. I've not prepared anything, so if it gets too hard, I'm just going to point to them and say, yeah, that's what they said. So, I don't know what the biggest change is going to be, because it's a revolution, right? And it's a social revolution, and we are not going to know what the impacts are 100 years on from this. Just like with the agricultural revolution, we didn't know what it would mean to stop moving. With the industrial revolution, we didn't think about the urbanisation or the impacts of the combustion engine on the climate. We don't know. There will be a lot of disruption within different industries, and that's going to be really, really hard. And yeah, I'm from Wellington, we're looking a little bit at that at the moment, and so you know that it's hard for the actual people who are sitting there, and how support them, because it is hard when your whole industry is ripped to pieces through a new technology. But then, with that, I'm a gardener, right? So a good pruning of a tree is going to give you a lot more fruit afterwards, but oh my God, does it look a sad, sad state when you first prune it. But we know that good is coming, and AI also has the huge potential for, like listening to you, Paul, on your son, huge potential for diverse ways of learning, and we don't have to do school in the traditional Western way anymore. We can actually create learning environments that work for every single student using this technology, and that is going to open up so much creativity that I am excited about what the next generation is going to be bringing to the world, and how they are going to be changing it using the technology as a partnership rather than it taking over. And so I hope I'm alive long enough to see that.
I'm sure you will, Emma. Yeah.
I've got a pretty dodgy lifestyle.
Thanks, Emma. Hi, I'm Jonathan. I'm principal scientist from Callaghan, but I'm also doing a PhD with computer science here at Auckland University. So I guess I can sort of give perspectives from the sort of government agency, sort of research institute, and also, you know, from the PhD student doing the AI. I guess with any sort of technology, you're going to have good things and bad things. And AI, obviously, it will disrupt a lot of the traditional sort of jobs that we have, and some of the jobs I think might become irrelevant in the near future. But I think there's a lot of good that AI brings in, especially in the, and there's a lot of new opportunities, I guess, especially for places like New Zealand. I was in Albert's talk a couple of days ago, and Albert mentioned that AIs could be summed up into three things: data, algorithm, and computing powers. I mean, you know, seeing a lot of, you know, my colleagues in PhD and also around our institute, I see that there are a lot of smart people in New Zealand. So I think there are a lot of people who can do the smarts, who can make algorithms, who can train things. But I think what lacked before was, because New Zealand's so far from everyone else, that it was really hard to get some really good data, a large amount of data, as opposed to people who's in Europe and in the US. But I think with prevalence of AI, it's actually relatively easier to find good large data sets. Like, for example, DNA data sets, which, say, 10 years ago would have been really hard to attain. You can actually get them just through, you know, GitHub, Kaggle, Hugging Faces. I mean, we could talk more about the biases in those data. But apart from that, so I think, although we are far from everyone else, we actually have a lot more access towards those data that we need. And also, speaking of computing powers, right? Everyone has GPUs now. So it's a lot easier to train models or try out different sort of language models or any sort of models without too much of a hassle. And even, you know, through like public clouds, we have, you know, Paul from Catalyst Cloud, we have some really good public cloud systems. So you can actually do these testings, run these models, even without, you know, paying for the hardware up front. So I think, in a way, that there's a lot of opportunity for New Zealand sort of AI researchers to take the initiative, because now those barriers that stopped us from getting data, that stopped us from getting computing power, aren't really, you know, there's less of it now. So yeah, I think, I mean, granted, it's going to be hard for us to compete with people in US and Europe, but at least it's going to give us a lot better chance to compete in the world stage.
Thank you. Now, I think it's a really good start, actually, looking at what the most impact that AI could have on society. But I think that if you want to give us your view on New Zealand, it's a small country. Well, how do you think their impact could be significant, and where, I mean, at some point we will have to make a choice in New Zealand because it's small. So why do you think you should probably power some of the AI for the New Zealanders? Which one? Yeah, you can start.
I'll probably start because I have the mic now. I think I think Daniel mentioned that there are we have this really good indigenous sort of culture in New Zealand, and obviously having that. I think there's a good chance that there's a lot of uniqueness in New Zealand that we can sort of tap into. I've heard a lot of people saying that New Zealand is small and we are far from everyone else. But that also gives us a unique niche, I guess, to explore things that others haven't looked into. So I think one of the things that we could look into is, how at the moment there's like EU in US. I think there's a lot of legislation going in to make sure that if the big companies like Google or Microsoft is using like stories from a particular news agency, they have to pay for that thing. So I think we could probably do something like that. I think it was really interesting listening to the talk about the generative AI Reo Maori, that one of the things that needs to happen is recognizing where the data came from and where that sort of, who's actually generated that data. And it'd be really good if we can get some legislations or framework to regulate, to make sure that, if they use these cultural data, that they recognize the people who actually created those data, and some of the revenue that generated from those data goes back to the community so that they can then grow and nurture their sort of cultural benefit and their culture. And then I guess it will create this positive cycle where they can contribute more and actually benefit from it, not just being exploited by it.
Do you think that Callaghan at the center of innovation, I think would be nice for Callaghan to target specific innovation for New Zealand or not, for instance?
I think Callaghan sort of, with the new government, it's changing a little bit, but we actually have a very wide range of research people doing different things like advanced materials. I'm in data science and computer vision. There's like Glycosin who does like all this biomedicine type of things. But I think there's a lot of talk about concentrating it into four things like AI, space, biomedicine, and whatnot. So I think New Zealand is small, so I think we need to perhaps focus our sort of energy into things that we could be really good at. But at the same time, I want to see this diverse I don't want to lose sort of diverse knowledge, because I think a lot of the issue that we have in New Zealand is the brain drain. We nurture and we educate this really good people, and then we lose them just because we don't really have a job for this. So I'd like to see Callaghan or government sort of concentrating on certain areas that they would be good at, but at the same time have some facilities so we can keep this really diverse and great people in different fields.
Okay, so probably Daniel, speaking to regarding Maori people, do you think the benefit of AI for Maori people is huge or it's really significant? It could be. And if yes, in which way could it be?
There is a bit of work to do on the trustworthiness side. I think. So there is, you know, there have been different kinds of reports and investigations into what trustworthy AI is, and we had a wānanga here a few years ago about Māori perspectives on trust and automated decision-making. And one thing that came out is that there is not an exact equivalent word in Te Reo Māori for trust. And I was having a look recently, there was a report by the Auditor General that was also looking at Māori perspectives on trust. And when Māori hear the word trust, their notion has other characteristics that are associated with it. There are things like reciprocity, there are things like relationships, there are things like not having a massive power differential, there are things like tikanga. So trust, when you talk to Māori about trust, it's a different notion of trust. The expectations are that you're satisfying those elements. And, you know, in some ways, you know, you have a look at things like the principles of Māori data sovereignty, even though there's not an exact equivalent of trust, there are words that have these characteristics. Whanaungatanga, manaakitanga, whakapapa, kaitiakitanga, all of these have these relationships and obligations and regulate in these areas. So in a way, we've got you know, frameworks for building trust. It's just if you look at something like, say, the Algorithm Charter, on the very first line, they set aside principles of Māori data sovereignty as something to be addressed elsewhere while building trust. So there's this trust element that needs to be built and, you know, technical capability, and that'll get things rolling, I hope.
It's very important. So, talking to Etik, actually Emma, it's your turn.
Yeah, so the algorithm charter does sit within my area, so yep, duly noted, duly noted. I loved that actually, because trust within Māoridom is around action rather than just a word. And I think that that's really important. I think that the actions that we do is what builds trust, because it is about whakawhanaungatanga. And we have the ability to do that within New Zealand because, you either did something dodgy at university or went to school with every single person in the country, probably. We know a lot of people and we are connected to a lot of people. And culturally, actually, whether you use the word whakawhanaungatanga or not, it is a concept that we know well. It has always been over a cup of tea and a biscuit, and you will get to know your neighbours. And I think that that is a fundamental part of who we are, and I would hate to see that lost. On the regulation stuff that you were talking about, Jonathan, I don't know if we need to do regulation and law here ourselves. We are a taker of technology, and when I look at data sets, we do not have the data sets in this country to be able to train the level of AI that is coming down the pipeline. And so therefore, partnering with people like the EU and with America and with Singapore and other countries that are going to be moving faster in this space is sensible, because we will need to be partnering with them as we go forward. And having people like Ali Knott, who was talking yesterday, sits on the Global Partnership for AI, which is an international forum. His working group influenced both Biden's executive directive and also the EU AI Act on things that are important to us as New Zealanders and putting it into that global context. That's where we can actually start developing things. And it is, once again, those relationships that we have internationally. We are not, ironically, we are not an island, but we need to be connected to these people. The other thing that I've been thinking about an awful lot recently, and I do not have an answer for this, so if you do have an answer, please come and tell me. When we start planning, and the question that you put up around our place in the world, our place in the world is going to be changing, and it's going to be changing a lot sooner than we think. This pasty white look, it's not going to be around in New Zealand that much longer. And we need to be thinking about what those different worldviews mean and how important a Te Ao Māori perspective is, but also different Asian communities coming in and what their perspectives are, the Pacific. And when climate change hits and people are displaced from lands, there is going to be a lot of anger from the fact that they are displaced from lands. And so therefore, it's not necessarily going to be the conversation that we think. We need to have these brave conversations now because we're not going to look like we are now. And in another 10 years, things are going to be fundamentally different, society-wise as well as technology-wise. And so how do we start prepping for that now? And it can't be in the old school Western philosophies. We need to be looking a lot wider.
Great. Just following on that, so there is this idea of sovereign AI. This is something that came recently from Jason Huang, from the CEO from NVIDIA. So he mentioned that, yeah, countries, they should have their own, for having their own AI, they need to have their own infrastructure, data, workforce, and business networks. So yeah, I was wondering, what are your thoughts on that? Should New Zealand have their own sovereign AI? Would you like to answer that?
I read that question and I was like, yeah, that sounds like a really excellent idea. How would you do that? So I'm going to pass it to some of the data people because they may have some ideas. Anyone?
Sure, I'm happy to talk a little. I think Tuesday this week I listened to an interview on Afternoons where Frank McLeod Jr. was interviewed about Project Liberty. I knew a little bit about it, I hadn't heard. One of the concepts, though, that I want to borrow was he was encouraging us, I guess me, to replace the word data when I'm reading terms and conditions or press releases from large, powerful tech companies with personhood, and see how I feel now as I read through what I am agreeing to. I don't think that I'm solely the aggregation of my digital footprint. I think there's more to me than that. But it was an interesting experience. Then I thought about, how do I feel as a father with a child who's agreeing to terms with little, no reading. I think about surveillance in society from a point where legislation started when a law enforcement officer observed something, probably a man, him, wrote it in a notebook, shared it with a colleague over a beer at the end of the day, and maybe put it in a filing cabinet. The system had natural limits. There's only so many bits of paper you could file, so many beers you could have, and so many law enforcement people to observe. Nowadays, observation or surveillance is incredibly different. We do it willingly and gladly, right? We have digital assistants in the house. I carry a phone. I wear tech. I leave little pieces about me, fragments of my personhood wherever I go that are being hoovered up. But unlike law enforcement 100 years ago, these pieces are now never forgotten. They're aggregated at a rate and a collection size never possible. They're never lost or misfiled. They're reprocessed with rapid speed for purposes that weren't known when first collected. In most cases, the powerful elites behind these are not working for my interests, for your interests, or for New Zealand's. They have profit motives or objectives that have little to do or not informed by things I may care about. I'm not exactly sure of the answer. We can't invent again or recreate everything in the world. There are limited means. But I am a supporter that sovereignty must outwork itself in some tangible way. Historically, we may have needed a navy to patrol maritime borders. We invest a lot in border security for, pests and diseases as much as immigration issues in New Zealand. But sovereignty in data, sovereignty in AI, sovereignty in cloud would take a change in our spending. We can't do everything here, but we could do a lot more. We choose to rent when we could build or buy. We choose to send our money overseas where the high-value jobs are. They're not in New Zealand in most of these big companies, they're elsewhere. If we changed our spending patterns, if we changed where we shopped, if the money started flowing differently, I think we would nurture sovereign capability in these areas subconsciously or as a byproduct of purchasing differently. Of course, as a sovereign cloud company, I would like to see that. But I happen to work in one because I believe in that rather than the other way around. I think we would be better to seize some control of our destiny and have a made in, by, of, and for New Zealand standard.
That sounds like a great pitch. Manifesto. Yeah, I mean, so I saw the written version of this question, which had privacy and data sovereignty, and so I was thinking about those things because, you know, you can have the term data sovereignty refer to things like jurisdiction, whereas in the Indigenous data sovereignty context, you're talking about sort of rights going to the peoples from whom the data came from, which, you know, you might have different sort of boundaries there. Should New Zealand develop its own sovereign AI? Yeah, you know, you can't do everything, but there are some things that you might not necessarily want to outsource. But, you know, there are prerequisites there. We've got a shortage of talent. You know, even, you know, having a chat to some people, you know, they can't do certain things because they don't have the right people, you know, and particularly with respect to Māori capability, when you're talking about the regions, you know, some regions might be better stocked than others, right? So it's a tough sort of talent battle. But, you know, I think in terms of capability building, universities have a real place for growing Māori talent who will then want to do something with their communities. But it's a long pipeline. But I think it's worthwhile trying to pursue. Yeah. Thank you.
It's a bit like planting a tree. It takes time, but we know that the result at the end will help fighting against climate change. So it's a bit of a same long view, I think.
I was thinking about just a case that sort of came to mind, thinking about bias in AI rather than, you know, techniques for getting representative data and all that kind of stuff. The case was, so you got Christopher Luxon, who's got his 9 goals for 2030. One of them is to reduce surgical wait times. So for elective surgeries, no one should have to wait more than 4 months, right, for their surgery. That's the goal. Now, there was a proposal after everybody came out from lockdowns to clear surgical backlogs, and that was to take a model that had been developed, the NZ risk model, that what it does is you plug in your health details, your age, your ethnicity, all this kind of stuff, and the kind of surgery, and it's going to tell you what your risk of mortality is 1 month, 1 year, 2 years, right? And the idea was, this has been trained on historical health data here. And the idea was that if you could use this model and you could take those who are low risk and you could expedite their surgeries, right? So this was the idea for clearing the backlog. But also with this model, if you were Māori, you had effectively a 10-year age penalty health-wise compared to the category European/Pākehā. So you're going to have fewer expedited cases for Māori in a health system where the health outcomes are already poor, right? And then last year there was the case of the equity adjuster for surgeries, and this became a political football because it was trying to address some of those health inequities. We're not at the point of really having a civil discussion about equitable AI, and the current political environment doesn't help that, but it would be great to get there. I don't know what it would take to do that, right? So it's not just a technical issue, it's a social issue regarding the demand for this.
So there's a researcher here at the University of Auckland, and he works in the engineering school doing AI. And the way that he works is that he goes into communities and he talks to the community about what problem they're facing and what information they have. And then he builds responses with them within the community, using the data, and the power is put back into their hands. And they have trust because he turns up in the community, he has these conversations with them, and then the use of the technology is put back into their hands for them to be able to deliver. And he is always there to be able to do the capability and the driving, but he will upskill them as well. And it is small, but from that, it will grow. And he's just like quite random things that you wouldn't necessarily think about. But he was talking to an iwi, and one of the issues that they had was a lot of their rangatahi were going overseas and they weren't connected into their culture. So he developed them a virtual marae, and so that people could come to the marae whenever they wanted, wherever they were, and they kept that continuation of their culture going. And when they arrived back in Aotearoa, they were connected as they always had been, and there were huge benefits to that. And he's done a whole pile of things within the house. When I look to central government, I don't know if the answer is central government. I think the answer has to be community, and it has to be us going out and talking to communities and working with communities. And whilst the algorithm charter doesn't address the issue of Māori data sovereignty, Ngā Tikanga Paihiri does, and that is possibly the best guidance that I have ever seen developed within this space. And whilst it's about using data and how to use data better, it's actually just about how do you work with communities? How do you ensure that what you take from the community, you give back? How do you keep those links going? And what is a framework to make sure that you can do that solidly? And so if we don't reach out into the communities and work with communities, one, we're not going to keep the trust, which is critical. And two, actually, I don't think we're going to achieve as much, because it's quite hard being in government at the moment, just because, within the last 10 years or so, it's really hard to be innovative and creative, because the speed with which the media will pick up anything and run with it, it means that no one gives you the space to be able to fail. And we need to be able to fail periodically and to learn from it and then to pick ourselves up. I remember many moons ago sending Steve Mahari, when he was still a minister, over to the US to learn about innovation and make us just a better nation. And the biggest learning that he got from Silicon Valley, which we shouldn't really have to learn, but I still don't know if we've got there, it's about the failure. It's very hard to actually get venture capital in Silicon Valley if you don't have 3 commercial failures under your belt. From failure, you will learn, and we should have the space to be able to do it. Now, yeah, you need to do it in a safe way, and that is working with communities to make sure that it is safe, but we can't do that in government anymore. We're too risk averse. So therefore, we look to academia, we look to communities, we look to partner, because it's not necessarily going to come from us.
Sorry. It's an interesting question, because every time I talk to people and say I do AI, they always ask, like, is AI going to kill us, right? Is that the end? And I always hear this sort of the doom and gloom stories, and me being perhaps naive and probably optimistic. I think, to me, we're at this sort of inflection point where AI is being used, because it's a new technology. It's being used for everything. But if you look back at when internet came out in the 90s, or 80s and 90s, everyone rushed to get websites. Everyone rushed to get widgets on their MySpace, right? And then suddenly it kind of became the norm, right? And when the smartphone came out, there's a meme where if someone does anything, they'll say, stop, there's an app for that, right? But how many apps do we download now, right? It just kind of became the norm, and it just kind of becomes too ubiquitous. We don't really think about it. So I think, to me, I think AI will become like that, will become ubiquitous. And we're at this sort of exponential inflection point, but I think it will plateau at some stage. And if you look at how the US and EU is trying to put a lot more pressure on and put regulations around misinformation that's happening in Twitter and Facebook, and pressuring them to make sure they identify and remove those information. I think that's just going to happen once AI adoption becomes, very high, and everyone kind of feels sort of comfortable with it. I think then that discussion is going to come out, and that regulation is going to come out, and I think then there'll be a lot more sort of tools to to look at sort of misinformation, look at sort of biases and things like that. And I'm sure that it will be an area for AI researchers like us to look into as well. And I think, to me, when in terms of sort of, doom and gloom sort of side of things, I think, after sort of World War I and II, UN was formed, right? Like, just to say, let's stop doing this because we know it's just going to kill us next time we do this, right? So I think something like that might happen. I think globally, I know GDPRs, EU is already kind of spearheading that space, GDPR. I reckon soon we'll probably have like a global but it would be like a regulation sort of body to say, yes, these are the sort of regulations you need. You need to follow these ethical regulations if you want to use data, if you want to do, scrape information from people, you need to follow these sort of rules. So I think those regulations will come. It's just that we are at this point where it's the pace of improvement is so fast that it's, the other things just can't keep up. Yeah. Oh, sorry. In terms of like the sovereign AI, I think, I think we will probably need some sort of sovereign AI for government agencies, especially to make sure that we can guarantee that what comes out from that AI is actually correct and accurate, right? But I think that's probably just to be used in a sort of official sort of things, mainly because I don't think we can use a sovereign AI for New Zealanders because we're kind of locked into this ecosystem, right? We have Android, we have iPhone. So unless you can influence those people, I don't think you can have wide adoption of your sovereign AI because people, I'll just take out my phone and just ask like, hey Google, can you do this? Or hey Gemini, can you do this for me, right? So I think it'll be very difficult to have that adoption. So I think, but saying that, I think there is a good idea as to why we should have sovereign AI, and I think that would be sort of for the to look after those official businesses or official sort of documents and recommendations.
Yeah, thank you. I think I've got, I have three thoughts relating to this area. The first one is that it's not as though all of you in the room are indifferent, objective, or removed from the issues of fairness. That data sets may have a bias and therefore that will show through, but so too do model developers, right? You build guardrails, you structure models in a way for certain outcomes. It's not as though anyone who's involved is completely detached, objective, impartial. So it's a question to you about fairness as much as the data set. There is well-known methods to mitigate against both of those. My second thought is about just listening to the comment about regulation and what's happening elsewhere. 1993, we got adequacy. For the Privacy Act 1993, we got adequacy. When I first heard the word, I felt, bleh. It's a half-empty word. I was not very proud about adequacy. You just scraped through. And yet there are not many countries in the world that hold adequacy with GDPR. I think there's 16 and about half of them are little European city-states. I think we could look elsewhere, borrow, adapt, and make quite rapid progress in a good enough regulation when we can't afford to do everything from first principles. So looking to countries we trust, we think there's an affinity with, and adapting where it doesn't suit, because none of them are exactly like us. So sort of bilaterals, but not quite. We're not exactly a European country anymore, I agree. But maybe we're a liberal democracy and we look to others, maybe not. Maybe we have to blend that, like cooking, where there's sort of a fusion to it. But we would benefit from borrowing, moving quickly and getting some safety things in progress, judiciously. The last part about fairness or equity is there is a lot of doom and gloom. I don't have people think that AI will kill us. Maybe I ask the wrong people. But I hear a lot about the workers it will displace, and therefore that has a profound impact. I need my salary. I like my job, but I need my salary. If I didn't get that, there are real consequences for my family. So I like to tune the conversation to areas not where AI will displace or replace people, but where there are problems that people are not well placed to solve, problems that are not being solved now because maybe labour's too expensive. I think of the agricultural or primary sector. There are many, many things. The people have largely come out, right? Go back 100 years, farms were big, rural schools were big. Machinery's replaced a lot of that, but there's still a lot of problems in forestry, in horticulture, in agriculture, in beekeeping and fishing that AI can really help with at a quality, at a pest control, at a value return on the export. And there's no people's jobs lost because the industry at the moment can't bear the wage rate for those people. I hope that we together can find opportunities where the technology adds value without perhaps replacing any of those people.
Great, thank you. So, yeah, continuing talking about this, so what do you think what about education? Do we need, what's the role of education on all of this, right? The internet changed everything, AI seems that it's going to change everything. So what happens with education? So how we can develop more talent and expertise on these topics? What are your thoughts on that?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, there's been some debates just recently, things hitting the news around having culturally safe spaces set aside where, Māori and Pacifica students can come in and connect and talk freely, but also relate to each other in ways that the university has not, from its historical roots, tended to foster. So I think, there's an importance in creating, ensuring that those spaces exist. Also try to do a number of things. We had a noho marae the other week, bringing in Māori who are in tech, and also, students and ex-students who were in their position, to show them, there are all sorts of cool projects that are going on now. This is what you could be doing, or in academia and so forth. But it can be hard sometimes. There are so many points at which, people can be knocked out, right? So, even this week there's been a flurry of emails around things like summer internships and studentships. Across the different universities, there are often research projects that say, right, we're going to support Māori, here's whatever it is, 10 grand. But then the systems around this, all of a sudden, apart from the advertised amount, there's tax implications that weren't flagged. The process is so slow that they have to wait 2 months. All this kind of stuff. So there's things that create real hardship while trying to do good. So there's still a lot of work in universities to try and make this safer. There's a lot that sort of seems to be workarounds that can end up doing more harm than good. There's a lot of work around cultural safety, I should say.
I think as the system starts changing, the way that we do education will change also. And about, 10 years ago, we decided we weren't going to talk about STEM anymore. We were going to talk about STEAM, and we were going to put arts back into it. We didn't do that well here in New Zealand, but overseas they taught a lot about STEAM. And I think actually it's those things, it's the human things, it's the creativity that will be needed, and the ability to connect. And so I sit there and I look at those kids that have been excluded from a lot of the education to date, and a lot of them are Māori and Pacifica students, but actually a lot of different kids that don't necessarily fit in with the very streamed way that we do education. There's going to be huge opportunities, and I think that we've lost so many skills from not having them feel as though they have a role within this world that is valued and useful, because I've worked with some of those kids over the years, and oh my God, the creativity that comes out of their mind is just absolutely mind-blowing. And I worry about what we are losing by not having them in this education system. And actually, if the education system isn't this Western idea of what it's always had to be, then actually we can open up an awful lot. And thank you for the stuff around the positive things. I remembered when you were saying it that I wanted to say that, so that was really useful. Yeah, what he said. I actually think that because we are so small and our productivity is low, that actually it will allow us to up our productivity by being able to put the boring, repetitive stuff out to the side and be able to focus on the real creative and innovative ideas that naturally we're very, very good at. I remember being at a speech that Ian Taylor gave once around DNA is in our, innovation is in our DNA, and he went through the progress of Māori to even arrive in this land and the innovation to get here. And it is just who we are. And sometimes I think we forget that, or sometimes we just use it as a cliche thing and we don't actually do it. But we need to get back to being those people and to be creative and to think outside of the box to be able to do things like we always have, because we're a country that is closer than any other to the South Pole and no one knows who we are, so we need to be doing things slightly differently. And I actually think that the video that you showed of him before was a perfect example of that, and that was some of the great thinking that has come out of New Zealand over the years, and we need to get back to that point, and it gave me huge hope for where we can go. So that was really beautiful. So yeah, I hope we do break the education system, because I don't think the education system's working for a large percentage of the kids that we have.
I have a different view on brain drain, not to disagree sharply, but like many of you, perhaps, I took an opportunity to go and travel and work elsewhere, and I benefited immensely from it. I chose to come back. My aspiration when I think of my son, right, he has 3 passports, he's got a choice of countries he could go to, or I think of my staff, or the staff I don't yet have, is to create an environment that they want to come back to. There's not a problem with leaving, it's a problem if people never come back. There's a lot of value to go out. I learnt immense amounts about myself, my heritage, because I was born in Europe, about other people, how similar, where we were different, where we were the same. And yet I came back. I hope that we can craft a society that values that makes space, that accepts the diversity and the creativity and all that people embody, that we have the employment opportunities, so people don't have to stay away to pursue the exciting work that they're capable of. Yeah.
Thank you. Probably you should take a few minutes actually for some questions from you guys about AI impact on society. Really happy to give the mic. Sorry, yeah.
Over the last couple of days, there's been a lot of talk about regulation. I'm wondering who polices regulation? How do we get regulation with tech? What's regulation mean in development? So I think regulation's good, but it needs to be effective.
Yeah, it absolutely does need to be effective. And also, regulation, the way that we've historically done regulation, it's not going to work with this technology, because we've basically said, can't do this, can't do this, can't do this. Actually, we need to do principle-based regulation and regulation that addresses problems rather than what we think is going on at the moment. There is a lot of conversations around whether we need to have an independent ombudsman or commissioner looking after AI. And there is definite benefit to that. Once again, I come back to how small we are, and we can't keep on sucking people into the bureaucracy, so you probably don't want to be setting up. But I look at the Privacy Commissioner and what he's doing. in that space, and it's like, it seems to me there are so many similarities between the privacy and the ethics and what we need to be thinking about. You would expand that office and look at that, and what he's doing in the bioethics at the moment is really, really, really good work. And if we can think about that, but the regulations need to be able to align with what's happening internationally, because as a lot of these people have said, we are part of the bigger picture. But at the same stage, the regulation needs to be able to keep what is quintessentially us and what is important to us as a nation. I love the idea of regulation for innovation, and you set your regulation high and people have to reach to it. Don't do it very well around the world. Scandinavia's had a couple of exceptions where it's done really, really well, but actually there is new ways to do regulation, and I think that we would miss a beat if we went back to old school regulation. Yeah.
What she said.
Yeah, I think, it's going to be really difficult to regulate AI. I mean, because the rate of change is just so great. You know, if you regulate, say, ChatGPT 3.5, you're going to get 4.0 next day, right? So to me, I think education, I think that's going to be more impactful towards making sure that there's AI ethics and fairness being applied correctly. Because at the end of the day, you can have all these regulations and legislations. Given the amount of data that gets consumed by the language models and large models, it's really difficult even if we wanted to look at what sort of data that gets into it, right? So to me, it's really comes down to the people. So I was really pleased when Yun Singh showed that there's AI ethics being provided as part of the Master of AI course. It's because we really need to make sure that the people, the up-and-coming AI researchers are really well balanced about and know about AI ethics and how to apply AI fairness in the data, because at the end of the day, those are the people that's going to create this AI, right? I mean, when we look at ourselves as our AI researchers, we actually have the power to either mitigate these biases and fairness in the data, or we can contribute towards it, right? So to me, I think, education would be a really good starting point. To make sure that we're actually making things better in terms of ethics and fairness rather than creating lots of regulations.
And actually that education across the whole of society is really important, because whilst we talk about the AI researchers, actually AI is going to change the dynamics, and anyone can become an AI researcher because AI will just do the coding for you. And if you have not had a basis in understanding ethics and understanding the power of data and how it can do harm, then, that scares the bejesus out of me. And so actually having these conversations across the whole of New Zealand so that we all understand it, but we do it in a way that's not in really, wanky terms like data ethics, but actually just talk about trust and actually doing no harm and not being a dick.
I mean, I spoke to maybe half a dozen people here yesterday, and for the younger, maybe chronologically, but younger in their research careers as well, they came with a very, by their own admission, a very narrow foundation of expertise to this, and have been surprised by the breadth of sharing, the different perspectives people have. As I spoke to some of the older, more senior people here, they said how quickly the agenda items or the conference programs changed over a few years. Who comes, what's talked about, what's thought about. That no longer is AI a data scientist and computer scientist topic. I think there's hope in that, by listening to each other, by sharing from the areas where I'm strong and listening to others in the areas where they're more experienced. There comes a maturity that may do as much good and probably quicker than regulation. It seems that that's starting. As any transformative technology becomes mainstream, the participant breadth grows, and I think there's a lot of health in that. I'm also a gardener and worked a lot in agriculture. Monocultures are inherently unstable. It's much better to have heterogeneity. I see that happening already. I think it's a promising sign.
Okay, I mean, sometimes when I've got my sort of, I don't know, fire and brimstone feelings out, it's like, I wish there was teeth. Right? But I think what I miss is the absence of civil society groups who can publicly hold groups to account who are not upholding the standards that ought to be acceptable in our society. And these kinds of discussions about what's acceptable regarding privacy, regarding surveillance, all of these kinds of things regarding bias. We just don't have a strong civil society group here. So I think, I agree with the rest of the panelists here. I just, wish there was a bit more conversation and more groups involved in this.
Actually, the civics is interesting. My son came home the other day and he said, Pa, what's civics? And he'd been watching something online where US school students of similar age were talking about civics as a subject they studied and then why they did it. So we had a bit of a conversation, and we've had 2 or 3 more since, and he's become quite fascinated about why we don't consciously develop this capability or why school isn't facilitating it. So I've just had to say, well, you don't need to rely on school. You and I can do this together. We have a few jobs to do every now and then, and we can explore this. But where is that foundation? We're weakened or worse off without it. The accountability that comes out, the critical thinking, the transparency that it demands and does, tenaciously until it gets. Yeah, it's a good topic.
Okay, so maybe then if there is no additional questions, so maybe we can finish. Just like to ask our panelists if they can end with just a brief statement on what they think could be a positive impact of AI in society or in New Zealand. Yeah.
For me, the best thing that I can do, my response to it, is to acknowledge that I'm a learner and I'm a teacher, that I'm on the journey alongside all of you, that I wish to travel together in relationship because on my own is quite lonely and a lot more dangerous, that I will commit to moving forward in small and measured steps. I'll take some risks. I'll build my familiarity, my competence, my confidence. I'll make mistakes and fail and fall. To those in my circles, I'm happy to be vulnerable about that and visible, because that's important. At home, at work, in friend circles. I hope that they'll do the same with me and include me in their learnings, and therefore we learn from each other, not just from our own mistakes. And so I suppose, paraphrasing somebody else, I must be the change that I want to see.
I think for me, because of the speed of the technological revolution and the fact that we've seen a lot of issues with the internet, and the negative as well as the positive, that actually, because we're living through a lot of that negative impact of the internet and particularly, social media, actually we're all really open to this could go wrong. And so I've not talked to one person who's not open to actually doing it better and being better for society. And so I actually think we're really well placed because it's living memory. We're living through this at the moment, and so we know what happens with the speed with which this is going and what can go wrong. So I'm actually hopeful we will do it so much, and optimistic that we will do it so much better this time. And yes, there will be bad actors, but I think the majority of it will be positive, and I think that we'll see huge positive impacts as it disrupts some of the, parts of society that aren't as great.
To me, probably the biggest positive that I see from AI is cross-sector or cross-faculty collaboration. I'm part of the machine learning group here in Auckland University. And in that forum, I see people with wide-ranging background, like people from medical, people from environmental science, people from chemical informatics, they all come to use AI to solve the issues that they had. And it's bringing this, this sort of mass collaboration that's happening in this AI space. And I think it's really great because, say 10 years ago, if I say, I want to look at how the peptides works in DNA, right? And I have zero medical background. People are just going to say, well, you can't do that. You don't know anything about medical sciences. Now, if I say, I want to look at how the peptides works in DNA, and I talk to my colleague, they'll say, oh yeah, I think I've seen that in GitHub or, Hugging Face, right? I think there's a lot of those data available, a lot of those ways to, you don't have to be an expert in certain area to try AI now. And it's good to be an AI researcher is because you can also collaborate with all these experts in different fields. And I feel that the people from the different fields are a lot more open about using AI for their issues. So I think in a way it's a good time for AI researchers in general, and also for people who's looking to get into, say, startups or sort of new industry, make disruptions in existing industry, mainly because AI, the adoption of AI is changing, scenes in the businesses, in the faculty, in the industry as a whole.
All right, so positive stuff. I think, there's a lot of potential to empower communities. I think seeing what the need is, just talking with others, even, with Māori communities, there can be a lot of other more urgent need, but there's also, potentially, around housing, employment, stuff like that, and then the digital sort of seems somewhere up in the clouds. But having, sharing concrete examples of where change has been made just to spur the imagination. If you've got the motivation on the ground, well then there's potential to help empower rather than to impose. I don't think we as a university are very good at that. I think we're hoping to try and change that through things like the Centre for Machine Learning for Social Good. But yeah, I think there's a lot of potential there. And again, you're sort of working with people in a way that's moving at their pace and safety. It brings a lot with it. That's just my thought.
Great. Thank you so much for this excellent panel. So please join us thanking the panelists.